Welcome to the Life Rocks podcast. In this podcast, we explore how nature, science, education, and culture can benefit all children and future generations. This is a show for educators, parents, mentors, and anyone interested in making the lives of our children, families, and communities better. So sit back, take a breath, and enjoy the show. And now for your host, Asher Cloran.
Hello, everyone. This is the Life Rocks podcast. I'm your host, Asher, and I'm here with Rosemary Clark today, who is trained in the language of listening, which is a very interesting communication system for talking to your children, but also for life. So Rosemary's newly married in her early 30s, and Rose found herself on a therapist's couch after burning out at work. It was there that she learned she had a highly abusive childhood. Her need to push herself so hard was rooted in trying to earn something that seemed out of reach her whole life, feeling her parents' love. During her time in therapy, she became pregnant with her first child. When she became a mum, it magnified her insecurities and started triggering unshed tears and unexpressed anger. She felt she had two choices: fall into the abyss of repeating what her parents did, or learn completely new ways of relating. Rose will forever be grateful that she stumbled upon language of listening, a parenting model that not only allowed her to become the mum she always wanted to be, but also allowed her to reparent herself. Now an authorized language of listening coach, she specializes in helping mums who have had difficult childhoods and gets them to a place where they love the way they parent. And this language of listening parenting model and communication model is a really powerful tool to help you get a better connection to your children, see the essence of where children are coming from, and gain a deeper understanding of how children are trying to communicate to us all the time. So I think there's other language models out there that people might be familiar with, like nonviolent communication, and these are really powerful tools because society is at a bit of a loss of how to communicate to each other. Oftentimes we're in our own head and we're not really receptive to the world around us or where people are really coming from. So I think these systems really help to break that down, and I'm really excited to hear where Rosemary is going to take us on this journey and introduce us to the tools, the language of learning. So Rosemary, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. And you're in Canada right now?
In Canada.
Easing into your evening?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's quite a story. We come up against these roadblocks in life where it's often our darkest hour where the ray of light hits us, and it can be that inspiration that not only carries us out of the darkness but also carries us forwards in life. So did you want to share any more about how you came onto the language of learning and when it dropped in for you that it was so powerful and important to you in your own life and development?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, you shared, a bit about my story, and then you're talking about darkness, and like oh man, there were some dark days of motherhood for me. When I think back, I ended up having two kids under two. And that was when things got really, really hard, where like all of a sudden I was having to split myself between two people, two vulnerable people that needed me. And that's when things got really, really hard. And I remember, I can think back to like seeing my child, seeing fear in their eyes, seeing them jump when I yelled, their whole little bodies, and standing over them when they're asleep at night in bed and thinking like, how, these are babies. Like, how is it that I feel angry with them? How is it that I react and respond to them this way? And then I couldn't sleep, because I'd be laying there trying to figure out how I could solve the problem. And so I started reading books and blog posts, and trying all different things, and nothing was really sticking. There's some really good stuff out there, but nothing was really fully working or sticking the way that I would hope, that I was hoping that it would. And then I stumbled on language of listening. And when I first started reading the website, I just knew that it was it. I knew that it was it for two reasons. One, because I had decided before I even had kids that I wanted my kids to be able to have their own thoughts and feelings and opinions and have those things be honored and valued. They were not honored and valued in me. And so I knew from that void that I had experienced that it was something that I wanted my kids to have in their lives. And so this model, it really does, like, it's a strengths and needs-based model. So what it does is it teaches the parent how to, or the teacher or whoever's with the child, how to draw the strengths out of the child, to really focus on their strengths. And so just to be able to like have a model that gave me the thoughts and the tools to draw the goodness out of my children, to see it, to recognize it and see it, because my brain was so wired to always see everything they were doing wrong. Out of fear, really out of fear. And so to have a model that would teach me how to see that what they were doing right at all moments, to truly deeply trust them and draw all that goodness out. But then also there's this flip side of it where like you get to be the one in charge. Like you're the parent. You have to have boundaries. Boundaries keep children safe and they keep you sane as a parent too, And so this model has both. Both I got to be a parent who was in charge with boundaries that allowed me to maintain a deep connection with my child. I didn't have to yell at them. There didn't have to be any punishments in order to get my children to, to do as they were asked to do, to get them to be cooperative. But also I got to really give that part that's really juicy for me, which is really seeing the goodness in them and being able to draw that out.
Yeah, that's really powerful magic there. I think that people are often honed in on the things that they're trying to control and don't always see the other side of the coin. So to have a system that can enable us to look at the lighter side of life and focus on the strengths rather than the weaknesses is pretty powerful as a parent. Where do you see that most modern parents are going wrong in their communication? And what are the major sticking points for parents when it comes to communicating with their child, and how are these moments influencing the future of that connection, the child and the parent?
Wow. There's just like so many thoughts rushing into my head here, so I'll try to keep them, straight and clear as I respond.
Sure.
The first thing that came into my head is just this idea of, you're saying like, what are parents getting wrong? And I think, what's happening in society is just what I already mentioned, is the fear. There's so much fear. And as parents, we don't trust ourselves. We've been taught to not trust ourselves. So we don't have connection to the inner wisdom and the intuition that's inside of us. Where it's like who we are, like we are the best parent for our children, right? And so we really need to be connected to who we are. And who you are, your identity is very much connected to your boundaries. And in order to be able to communicate well, you have to be able to communicate your boundaries well, right? And so that idea of like trusting yourself, and trusting in your own identity, trusting in your own boundaries, like that was one of my big issues, was like, anytime I tried to hold a boundary as a young adult, it was kind of like, well, this is kind of sort of what I want, if that's okay with you. My boundaries always came with this question, and it's like, no, that's not what a boundary is. Boundaries don't have questions attached to them. They just are. They're who you are. And so having that real sense of self-trust is so huge. And then just trust in general. There's this quote from Language of Listening that the first time I heard the founder, Sandy, say it, it brought tears to my eyes. And I had to keep hitting rewind, and listening to it over and over again, because I felt like it's what I really needed in childhood. And I'll try not to butcher the quote, but it goes basically like this. Imagine not having to defend your intentions. The world feels like a much safer place around someone who can see your true intentions. That's the basic gist of what it says. And like I said, I literally started crying, the minute I heard that, because if somebody had been able to see me and understand me and really trust that I had good intentions, as a child, that would have made all the difference for me, I think. And so, that idea of trusting yourself and really trusting the child's intentions, I think that's, one of the areas that we can look at when it comes to shifting parenting in our society. And again, like it's not really like it's this terrible thing that people are doing or something that terribly that they're doing wrong. It's a survival mechanism. It's based on fear, right? And the way we've been parenting for a very long time now, this reward and punishment, it really is steeped in fear. It's, the child is raised in a fearful environment and they become a fearful adult. Another thing that I really wanted for my children after I started to learn language of listening, I was like, oh, I'm an adult who makes decisions based on trying to prevent bad things from happening. This is not a fantastic way to live, right? Like full of anxiety, is my brain when I'm trying to make decisions. I want my children to make decisions based on self-belief. Based on the fact that they can trust themselves, that kind of an idea, So I love talking about unconditional self-trust. I think parents could really use unconditional self-trust and that if they can have unconditional self-trust of their children as well. So that's kind of like a bigger picture of like, here's this huge piece that we can be looking at as parents. But I'd love to give like even a small practical thing, of the way that we communicate that could be different, because this is a big part of the tools that we use in language of listening. So here's what's happening in society, because we are shifting in parenting, right? We are recognizing, that maybe some of the things that our parents did were not the healthiest things for us. All parents are doing the very best that they can, So one of the shifts that we've been starting to make is this idea of really trying to praise and encourage our children, because we didn't feel praised and encouraged growing up. And the only thing that's kind of that we, can really shift when it comes to praise, because we're so on the right track when we come to we want our children to have a good self-esteem, right? We want them to believe in themselves. And so again, we're using praise, but the issue with praise is that what it does is creates people pleasers. It causes the child's self-belief to live outside of themselves and other people's judgments and opinions. And what we want to do is get their belief rooted and grounded inside of them, so that it doesn't matter what environment they're in. Doesn't matter who they're around, they're believing in themselves. And so when we're saying things like good girl, good boy, good job, it makes me so happy when you do this, right? That's getting the child's value and worth rooted outside of themselves. We want to get it inside. And so I can start to talk about two of the tools from language of listening to talk about how to do that.
Yeah,
that's a good direction to go in. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the tool that we use very simply to build up the child's self-belief is called strengths. We just name the child's strengths very, very simply. But the thing that makes the strengths tool very different is using the first tool from language of listening called Say What You See. And Say What You See is just literally reflecting back to the child anything you see them saying, doing, thinking, or feeling with no judgments attached. No judgments. You're just really reflecting directly back to them exactly what's going on. And I'll tell you that the difference, in that, for it to be like true Say What You See, is if you walk into the kitchen and your child is pouring water on the floor, you might think Say What You See is you're making a mess on the floor, but there's a judgment hiding in that statement, right? So if we say you're pouring water on the floor, because that's exactly what's happening, and then we can move into, letting them know where they can pour water on the floor. That's a different step of language of listening. But when it comes to the strengths, you literally give real world proof that lives inside, what the child is doing, saying, thinking, or feeling, right? By using Say What You See, and then you name the strength. So I'll give you an example, very, very simple, basic example. Yep. When I first started using language of listening, my youngest was 3, and I couldn't hold all the strengths in my head at once. So I picked one strength. I'm like, okay, what's one good strength for a 3-year-old? And I thought, helpful. Okay, I'm gonna notice when she's helpful today. So the first thing I did was ask her if she could bring me a butter knife. I was in the dining room and I said, can you get me a butter knife from the kitchen? So she brought me a butter knife. So Say What You See, very, very simple. You brought me a butter knife when I asked, then naming the strength, that shows you're helpful. Simple like that. Yeah. I said it twice more to her that day. Notice when she was saying helpful, you Say What You See. And the third time she said, Mommy, you keep saying that. And I was like, yeah, it's just something I'm noticing about you today. The fourth time that I named the strength for her, she grabbed a chair in the kitchen, dragged it over to the kitchen sink and climbed up on it. And she said, Mama, whenever you're feeling sick, I'm going to help. And I'm going to help right now by washing the dishes. She was 3 years old. And that acknowledging what they're doing and naming the strength for them, it changes the way that they see themselves. And so one of the premises of language of listening says that children act according to who they believe they are. So this is why, getting the child to see who they are, seeing the goodness in them, drawing those strengths out of them, is so important, because it really does direct the way that they make decisions about their behavior and about their lives.
Yeah, wow, great example. And I think I've seen a lot of parents deal with this kind of dichotomy between either good girl or bad girl, or good boy and bad boy, and that's based upon mummy's or daddy's preference about behaviors. And going back to what you said about boundaries, is that unless the parents are in touch with those boundaries and also have some method of communicating them and sticking to them, then those boundaries are always going to get violated. And I see the parents spinning into this good bad argument, like, oh, you're being a bad girl, therefore no iPad. And then child's like, okay, I'll be quiet for like 10 seconds and pretend like I'm being a good girl, and then I get the iPad, and then it's like the bad behavior is coming next. And it's like, but the parent didn't really want to give the iPad. Like if the parent was clear with their boundaries, they know, actually I'd prefer not to give the iPad, because I know they turn into little shits when they've had too much iPad. But the parents feel this like congestion around, they can't express the boundary and go through the apparent suffering that's going to happen if their child throws a tantrum, that they can't have the iPad. So yeah, I think it's really, really powerful that parents have a tool where they can express their boundaries and communicate their boundaries in a way that's not like a micromanagement or a demand type thing, but it's more of an influence, and it's influencing the child by encouraging their best self out of them, if I'm getting these concepts right of what language of learning does.
Yeah, language of listening. Yes,
Language
yeah.
of listening,
So
sorry.
yeah, it's all good. So that whole idea of being able to hold boundaries and feeling uncomfortable with them for sure is a thing that happens. And then that idea of, because we do feel powerless as parents, and so we will resort back to, the things that were done to us. But again, when punishment happens, what it does is it just leaves the child with a void. So anytime the child is, behaving in a way that we don't like, we can go back to this idea of their true intentions. They always have good intentions. And this is another premise of language of listening, which says that all needs are driven by three healthy needs: experience, connection, or did I say all behaviors? All behaviors are driven by three healthy needs: experience, connection, and power.
Right.
So what that tells us is that everything the child is doing is driven by a healthy need. The behavior itself might not be healthy, or the behavior might not be behavior that we like,
right,
but it's always coming from just them attempting to learn how to meet a healthy need.
Totally. So I think of it, I thought of an example that popped into my head then, is the 4 or 5-year-old who's pulling everything off the shelves in a shop, and it's lacks decorum, this kind of behavior. You don't want that whilst you're out and about. Yet the 4 and the 5-year-old, they learn through their hands, and their hands is like their teacher at that phase in life. They're trying to experience the world by touching everything they can around them. So yeah, good intentions, evolutionary desire to communicate with the world through hands, but inappropriate behavior.
Yes. Yeah, it's a behavior that a parent is not going to like, right? So my boundary for my children when we go shopping, they're older now, so they have more self-control, but it was always like one finger only. They could touch whatever they wanted, but with one finger. So I knew they couldn't get 2 fingers going to pick anything up, So, and that worked really well for us, that worked really well. But you're right that those children are typically meeting their need for experience. Right. And the need for experience is, I've got this body, what can I do with it? I've got this life, what is it all about? Like, it makes me think back to the beginning of the pandemic. I was living in Nova Scotia at the time, and the rules were very strict. Schools were shut down. We weren't allowed to go to the library. We weren't allowed to go to parks. And all of a sudden I was finding shampoo smeared all over my wall, in the bathroom. I was finding my jewelry in bits and pieces all over the house. And I'm like, my children are meeting their need for experience in ways that I don't like. And they're stuck in this little space, without a lot of stimulation. So what I can do, and this is what we do, this is the third tool of language of listening called can-dos, is I come in as the parent with my boundaries, and help the child find a way that's easy and predictable for them to get their need for experience met. And so that's what I did. I dove in with my kids and I'm like, hey, shampoo does not belong on the wall. It just doesn't, and my jewelry, I want it to stay in one piece. And it's going to stay in my bedroom in one piece, and let's find some things to do. Let's make life exciting for you, because it is that idea of exploration and learning. The kids just can't stop themselves. Thank goodness.
Yeah, they're learning machines.
Natural. Yeah, I love that. Learning machines, right? And so just finding them, facilitating for them, because they're always going to be meeting their needs. Actually, I said that premise from Language of Listening. I only gave you the first half. So all behaviors are driven by 3 healthy needs: experience, connection, and power. And what children are doing are already meeting their needs. Our kids are already meeting those needs for growth. But it's our job as parents, or our job as teachers, right? If we're talking about teachers, it's our job to create that box, right, of the boundaries. We need to be clear on our boundaries, let the kids know what the boundaries are, and then they can meet their needs however they like within the boundaries. Simple.
Yeah, really cool. Really cool. And it reminds me of student-led learning, which is a big thing nowadays and has been in certain disciplines, Reggio Emilio and Montessori and bit of Steiner, and in homeschooling you see these principles applied. And parenting too, quality parenting, where the parents or the teachers are deeply observing their child and seeing these underlying needs. So behaviors up here happening, but underneath it is this urge, which you're saying comes experience, power, and what was the third?
And connection.
Yeah. So I think that's really powerful if parents and teachers can start to observe those hidden urges or needs that are being met through a child behaving in a certain way, and that it's the role of the teacher or the parent or the mentor to help to guide that direction towards maybe some more quality type activities, or something that's a bit more peaceful, or a little bit better for everyone.
Yes. Yeah. That's both, personally and socially beneficial for the child, and within, the teachers or the parents' boundaries. Yeah.
Yeah. So this would have massive potential in the schooling system, where, a lot of schooling is based around getting people to behave in a certain way and complete certain tasks, but it doesn't foster that child having a sense of their own power and their own ability and their own presence, with their own life. They become externally motivated and sort of externally influenced. Can you share a little bit how you've seen maybe children turn around in their sense of themselves and their identity, and with this type of engagement and communication?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So another story that I can share is about the strengths tool, but in Language of Listening, we would call this finding a hidden strength. Hidden strengths are a lot of fun because you can, again, just keep looking, for the child's true intentions. And so this story is about my same daughter. I tend to tell more stories about her because she's my fiery child. That is so much fun. But it's also really teaching me how to dive in deeper to all of these things in a really wonderful way. And so I do have a boundary in my house. Your boundaries are your likes and dislikes. Boundaries and rules are different. This will be a fun thing to talk about. Boundaries and rules are different. So my boundaries that are connected to my identity is that I do not like Sharpie marker. I don't like permanent marker on my walls or on my furniture. Okay. And I have a rule. Some people might have the same boundary. I think most parents don't like Sharpie marker on their walls or their furniture, but we might have different rules, So one of the rules in particular that I had was, if a child finds a Sharpie marker, they must bring it to an adult. That was it. Pretty straightforward and simple. And so my daughter, who was 4 now, had found a Sharpie marker behind the cabinet in the dining room. And she knew the rule, and I know she knew the rule because of what she did. So she saw the Sharpie marker, she got excited, and she started walking towards me holding the Sharpie marker up. And then she changed her mind at the last minute and grabbed that Sharpie marker, held it into her chest, covered it with her other hand, and was kind of looking at me with these squinty eyes. And my brain my brain did what our parent brains do because they're so wired for fear. I started thinking into the future and worrying about things like, what's she going to do with that marker? Like, like, is she going to hide it? Is she going to run and mark on the walls with it? Right? All these fear thoughts. And then my fear was like, how can I get this from her? I have to get this marker from her. Like, and how do I do that? Like, do I threaten her and send her to her bedroom? Do I grab it out of her hands? I'm bigger than her. I should be able to grab it. And then I was just like, no, language of listening. So I stopped and I said, say what you see. I did the say what you see. And I said, you found a Sharpie marker and you started giving it to me. And then I named the hidden strength. That shows you know how to follow the rules. That's it. I trusted her. I trusted her intentions. I saw the goodness in her. And the minute those words were out of my mouth, her face went right back to a smile and that marker got handed right back to me. And from that day forward, it was a game for her to try to find a marker and bring it to me because kids love to experience themselves in their strengths, using their strengths. So for her to experience that strength over and over again, that she's someone who knows how to follow the rules, she would find the Sharpie markers just so she could experience the joy of living, in that strength. And that's where, say what you see, it buys you a little bit of time. I can think of another time with her where we were trying to get out the door and I was really frustrated. We were late to pick her dad up from work. And it was a struggle the whole time trying to get my two kids out the door. And then at the last minute, right when she was almost at the door, she turned around and started walking away from the door. And I was like, so frustrated, but I was like, say what you see. And I was like, you turned around and you're walking away from the door, And what that did was buy me 3 seconds. And within those 3 seconds, what I got was a child who I could see what a sweet, loving caretaker she was of her teddy bear. She was just going back to get a little scarf, something to keep her teddy bear warm with, And it really literally took 5 seconds and it was fine. But instead of me freaking out and yelling because I'd been trying so hard to get them out the door, I just kind of stopped and just said, say what you see. So even just the fact that say what you see can buy us a few seconds, just to really get a handle on what's going on. That's really helpful too.
Yeah, sometimes we need those few seconds and things are happening so fast in the moment, especially in communication with other people and children, loved ones.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Everyone could use a few more seconds. Hit the pause button. That'd be the best.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So in this podcast, I tend to ask people what your wish would be for future generations. And before the show, you mentioned that it would be to stop intergenerational trauma. Now, that'd be awesome. Let's totally do that. And I think that it's these type of tools, educating ourselves, looking at the science, coming together and putting this stuff together. And as you say, each generation's trying to do better. So I think it is possible that we can work on that one moving into the future and at least reduce the impact of the trauma over the years. But I'd love to hear from you what your plans are in that department and how you see that coming together and what that means for you, like what the intergenerational trauma does and how you see it play out, especially in the realm of parenting.
Yeah. Well, they did a study back in the 90s called the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Now, it was lacking quite a bit, that study. It doesn't talk about, maybe societal trauma like racism and bullying and stuff like that. So there's a lot that's missing from it. But this study, what it did uncover was that 2/3 of our society experiences childhood trauma. Most people have no idea. I didn't know that what I went through was traumatic until my therapist started asking me questions. Why are you working so many overtime hours? You're burnt out, like what's going on? And then, I said, well, I'm just trying to prove that I'm worth the space I take up in the world. And she was like, tell me more about that. And who are you trying to prove that to? And I was like, well, I guess my parents, And so And she asked me about my childhood, and then, this was the stuff that she knew. She actually had a specialty in, childhood abuse. So I didn't know that at the time, but I'm very thankful that she was able to reflect back to me, because it really did start me on this whole journey of like, it's not my fault. And actually my parents, they struggle with mental illness, and so it's not even their fault. But some of these things like personality disorders and whatnot that, we see quite a bit of in today's society, I know my parents are the way they are because of their childhood trauma, and so for me, when I first started wanting to work with moms, it was twofold. Part of it was I just really wanted to reduce the number of ACEs in the world. I wanted to play a role in children enjoying their childhoods and being able to be themselves. But also as a mom who was experiencing the pain of parenting in a way I didn't like, of yelling at my kids, of treating my kids in a way that I knew was like tearing them down, which is exactly not what I wanted to do, So there I was standing on the edge of, all of the childhood abuse that I'd been through that had caused so much pain, but also now potentially being a person that would be continuing that and doing that to the most precious people in the world, in my mind, my own children.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Life Rocks is not just a podcast. It is an education foundation centered around connecting children to the magic of nature through earth sciences. As a self-funded foundation and startup, we are constantly seeking support so that we can continue our great work. So if you feel called to donate to Life Rocks, please head down to the show notes and find the relevant donation link. We accept regular money as well as cryptocurrencies. We greatly appreciate you, our Life Rocks community. Now, back to the show.
It means everything to me to be able to have found the right tools, the tools that are very effective. Sandy, the founder of Language of Listening, she's genius in the way that she just really understands how children work. And I can tell you, my husband's a therapist, and he'll tell you, our marriage is better because we have these tools. Like you said, it's not just about children, right? It's our loved ones. My life is better because I have the tools to use them on myself, to understand myself. You read in my bio about, the fact that I've been able to use the tools to reparent myself. So to me, this idea of, stopping generational trauma it's all about the kids, but it's also all about the parents. No parent wants to cause that pain. Not really, And so in order to lift that heavy weight from people, to be able to play a role in that is huge for me.
Yeah, it's massive. And I think I'm just interested to hear from you is when you say trauma, I think of maybe some people out there think maybe that's just like physical abuse or, quite severe psychological abuse, but it's sort of like it's a spectrum of events, isn't it? And it can be just unconscious behaviors of a parent that can be abusive.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the parent's intention isn't abuse.
Yes. Yeah. All parents have good intentions too. They're just trying to meet needs. They're doing the best they can. Absolutely. For sure. But you're right. There's a lot of things that are unintentional. So the ACEs quiz, it goes through kind of 10 different situations. And so I know there's some people that think that spanking is still okay, and that they don't think that it's traumatic or that it's necessary. Unfortunately, it is something that is quite traumatic. For me, I was physically abused, quite severely, I'm told. You don't know when you're a child because it just seems like this is just how the world works, right? This is your experience of the world. So you just think that it's just the way things are and the way they're supposed to be. But when I look back, it's really the emotional abuse that I think was the most difficult for me. And that shows up in a lot of different ways for different people. So I think it's important for people to know, for sure, and to look into what that looks like and what that is. Because again, I think everybody has, those good intentions ultimately, and, being able to build children up, really, it's some of the most important work in the world. But I think even being able to step in and acknowledge your own trauma, the trauma that you've experienced, and being able to trust yourself, trust your own intentions, have that unconditional self-trust. That's where the work really, really begins, because it's very difficult to give that to somebody else. I always say to the moms I work with, get it for you and you've got it for your kids, because you just naturally pass it on to your children. It's beautiful the way it works, when you work with children or when you're raising children, that there's this almost this symbiotic relationship where it's never about giving yourself up and sacrificing 100%. I mean, that's kind of where we went, I think, when we started the attachment parenting thing that we were doing in our society, which again was great. I mean, I started off, I had my first baby and I looked at my husband, I was like, I read all these books on pregnancy and childbirth. And that was like a matter of, it was a very short amount of time. And now I've got all these years trying to raise this kid and I have no idea what to do. So I latched onto attachment parenting.
Can you give us a quick definition of attachment parenting?
Yeah, I don't know how good I'm at defining it, but I'll just say that, it's this idea of, where you really are focused on the attachment that the child has with you as the parent. Okay. And for me, it meant, yes, going to my child every time she cried, and feeding her on demand and just really being there and being available. But what happened for me, because I didn't have boundaries, is that I ended up with no boundaries, and I ended up completely exhausted and not knowing how to ask for help and just thinking that I had to be everything and give everything to my child. Okay. And it doesn't work when mom disappears. Sure. Life doesn't work. Parenting doesn't work. It doesn't work for the baby. It doesn't work for the mom. And so, just this idea of mom doesn't disappear. It really is a relationship where mom, gets her needs met, her needs for growth, her experience, connection, and power, and then she's able to, show up as her best self for her children and help them find easy and predictable ways to get their needs met, ways that help them feel capable and successful and satisfied and all those. Yeah.
Yeah, really, really powerful stuff. I see a lot of mothers sometimes get completely lost in motherhood, especially the first one, where there is this loss of identity and totally dissolving into that relationship. Yeah, please.
Which doesn't start in motherhood. That dissolving starts in childhood, where we give up who we are. We give up our identity. We give up our connection to our own boundaries in childhood in order to please our parents, in order to avoid punishment. And so then when it comes back to motherhood, it gets triggered in two ways. One is because motherhood's completely overwhelming and you're back in survival mode again. But also when you have a child, it's like the things from your own childhood that never got sorted, that your brain and your heart are still not okay with. Those things start bubbling up again. So you have a chance to work through them. And I think to help us not pass on the trauma, but sometimes it still gets passed on, and so learning these new premises, these new beliefs, and these simple tools, that language of listening offers us to make this shift. Again, for me, has been huge for my clients. When I think about it, I think one of the most powerful things is the way that I've seen my clients' children start to speak to them in the way that their parents are speaking to them now. I was so shocked one day when my daughter came out with her, she was about 2 or 3 years old, and she went, disturbing, she said it like that. And I was like, where did you learn that word? And then I realized that I had said it that time, many, many ways, So when I had one of my clients come to me and say, like, my 3-year-old came to me and said, it's really important to you that, that's one of the first, to say to children through language of listening, I teach, to point out to the child, like, what's really important to them, to get them centered on themselves and focusing, and paying attention to themselves. So 3-year-old comes back and repeats that to her mom, or another client that I had where she came and she said, my daughter walked up to me and she said, Mom, I just cleaned off my desk. That shows I'm responsible, so then the daughter's doing, like, say what you see in the strengths tool for herself. And I thought, look at that self-talk. Like, can you imagine if as an adult you walked around saying those things to yourself? Like, I did the laundry. That shows I'm responsible.
I think
that
I'm
shows
going
I
to
care
start
about
today. That's
Yeah.
what I'm going to start doing.
Yeah. But imagine we can raise kids whose brains already are wired that way.
Amazing.
Already work that way, right? And again, like, we love experiencing ourselves as successful. We love experiencing ourselves, functioning in our strengths. And so it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing all around.
Yeah, 100%. we all need a bit more courage in ourselves and love for ourselves and awareness of our strengths and to stick by them,
Yes.
even when it's tough. Absolutely. And yeah, I think that was a good definition for, talking about the different areas that a child in their childhood is going to experience. Maybe what therapists are calling abuse is it can be physical, emotional. It can be a lack of environmental needs being met. That's something that the parents unaware of or unable to attend to. I think one of the major modern abuses that is not called abuse now, but I hope it is in the future, is excess screen time, where you've got children on devices 7.5 hours a day. It's a form of sort of passive abuse where they're not getting access to the environmental needs to build a healthy body to have a great life later on. And
Yeah, I think that's an example of the parent not being able to get their own needs met. And so, we do this sometimes. We let the screen babysit our children or entertain the children because we're not able to be fully present. We don't have our own needs met. And so, so there is, there could be some neglect that happens there, but it's, again, the parent is neglecting themselves first. And so this is why I talk about that symbiotic relationship, that the parent, it's really good for the parent to know themselves, to trust themselves, to get their own needs met. And then the kids are going to get their needs met too.
So let's hypothetical scenario, mum of two newborn children, maybe they're about 4 years apart. One's, an infant and the other one's now a toddler. She's coming to an awareness that she has sacrificed herself in, the raising of these children. With her new infant, it's a bit easier and everything's working a bit better. That's given her more space to think about her own needs and think about her own future and stuff again. How would she go about reclaiming that and setting up experiences and making some boundaries in her life so she does get to experience the fulfillment of those needs? Are there some tools, or is it a mindset, decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what I can talk about is the thing that I think really blew me away in the training that we had, in the coaches training. And then it's the first thing I do with all my clients. The first thing I get them to do is I get them to sit down and get, 20 to 30 minutes on their own and write out everything that they can think of that they like and everything that they can think of that they dislike, because those are their boundaries. Those are their boundaries. And again, what happens is in childhood, we will set aside our connection to our awareness of our boundaries, our awareness of what we like and dislike, so that our brain becomes fully focused on what the adults in our lives like and dislike, so that we can please them, so that we can avoid punishment. You know what I'm saying?
Very boring.
And so, well, it's pretty boring for kids. Yes. Yeah. But it's like safety comes before, I mean, that's what I really found when I'm trying to figure out how do I meet my need for experience in life. Actually, my need for experience has always been just about creating safety. Like I need to learn how to have fun again. I feel like that's like the next big step for me.
Okay.
Is just learning how to have fun again, because completely just only trying to create an environment for myself always where I feel safe, it's exhausting. And I'm not in that much danger. Like I'm not in that danger. I was in danger when I was a child, but I'm not in that kind of danger anymore. So with this mom, if she can start to get connected to her likes and dislikes, because what I tell moms is I say there's this filter in our brain.
Yeah.
Like our brains are taking in tons of information at every moment, right? So there has to be this filter that only lets in the most important pieces into our prefrontal cortex so that we know what to pay attention to and be aware of. And so again, if as a mom, if our brain is completely wired to be focused on what other people like and what other people dislike, we do lose that connection to what we do enjoy, what we would like to experience, and we lose our connection to our boundaries, right? Like when have I hit my limits in motherhood? It's okay. Like motherhood is like completely overwhelming. It's not a one-person job, but so many moms are trying to run it as a one-person job. And so just knowing how to like recognizing when you have hit a wall, and when it is time to ask for help. And what I mean by help is like, just finding a mom down the road that's got kids the same age as you or similar ages, and you can swap off on, childcare, or, asking, your husband to bring takeout home, or going to get takeout yourself, or leaving the kids with with your husband and going to get takeout, whatever it is. But it's that idea of like your needs, just like your child's needs, like your needs live inside of you. They're like the ways for you to meet your needs in a satisfying way is unique to you. And so getting connected to your likes and dislikes. And then when it comes to that filter, I want to get the moms to shift that filter to when things are coming through the filter, they label it as, do I like this thing or do I not like this thing? So as an example, I would say, let's say that, you drop a glass on the floor and it breaks. Okay. You do say what you see to yourself. A glass fell on the floor and it broke. And then you just say to yourself, did you like it? Did you not like it? Right? You didn't like that. You didn't like that the glass broke. Or, Asher, maybe you did like it because old Auntie May gave you that glass and you thought it was the most hideous thing in the world and you could not bring yourself to give it away, and it's finally broken and you can get rid of it, and you love that idea. Yeah. Like, right? Like it really is about who you are. And so starting to see the world through like what you like and what you dislike is so powerful. And validating that in other people, starting, because once you can notice it in yourself, you can notice, well, this person likes this over here and they don't like that over there, so you can start validating that in your children. And I'll tell you, my husband says that's his favorite thing, is when I can validate to him what he likes and what he doesn't like. Most people love it because, again, your likes and dislikes make up your identity. And so when someone else can see you and validate your identity in such a simple way, like, isn't that so simple and basic, just what you like and what you don't like? But it's so, so powerful, super powerful.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, as people need to be more in touch with those things inside of themselves. And something I work with people on sometimes is I'll get them to write the bucket list, because maybe it's not likes or dislikes so much. That's a really good polarity to explore, because that's kind of like attraction aversion.
Yep.
But yeah, the bucket list idea is kind of like this idealistic realm of, your amalgamated desires in different things, and
wants and wishes, right? Wants and wishes.
People put so much on the back burner, especially parents, to make it through parenthood. And yeah, there's that kind of model that we've seen happen of just like self-sacrificing parent works hard at a job they don't like to pay bills, and just really, like full respect and take my hat off to them. But damn, there's got to be another way, to get a bit of both going on. And a child also needs to see that a parent is living a life, and that they are alive, and that they're not just an empty vessel for everyone else's desires to be manifest through, because that's not inspirational. And it's children want to follow a good example. So it's a dichotomy, and I think these tools start to bring people out of that problem and shed some light on the scene.
Yeah, because kids learn. I mean, the most effect we have on them is through who we are and what we do. So we model for them. Right. That's the main way that they learn, right? So, yeah, if you're a parent who can go after what they want, go after their wishes, that gives possibility for the child too. Then they have that option to go after what they want and what they're wishing for too. And that's huge, because, Asher, I'll tell you, we talk about wants and don't wants in language of listening too, because those things are also connected to your identity. So it's amazing that you're getting people to do that bucket list. It's just getting them more connected and more aware of their identity. And able to live it out. The wants are about living out the likes and dislikes.
Totally. So now I'm thinking about teenagers, and thinking about how there's these, times where they want to distance themselves from the parents. They don't necessarily want to hear what the parents have to say, or trying to find their own opinions, trying to find their own little world to exist in outside of the parents' realm. And one of the things that teenagers love to do is the silent treatment. So, one syllable answers. And I'm trying to think of a scenario here where these tools could come in handy. Like, teen walks into the kitchen and mum's like, "Hey, have you done X, Y, Z?" And teen's like, "No," and then just like walks out of the kitchen.
Yes.
So is it, I noticed that you give me a one syllable answer, and this is because you are efficient in the way that you communicate.
Oh, look at you looking for hidden strengths.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, and really, I mean, Asha, this is what, I recommend for parents, because, if parents are coming to me and they're struggling with their teenagers, there typically is a disconnect there, right? That there's been a certain distance that's been created.
And it's happened. It's ended up there. It's not just because they're a teenager.
You're right. Yes. Yeah. It's just kind of the way things have gone. And that's hard, like so many parents right now have broken hearts because they just feel so disconnected from their teenager. And they know there's only a few years left that they have any sort of influence really in their child's life. I mean, adult children are still influenced by their parents, there's no question. But when the child is still living in your home, when they're still a certain age, their brain's not fully developed yet still, there's still a lot of extra growth that can happen there. And so, when parents are struggling with their teenagers, it comes right back to the strengths tool. This is how you connect with your kids, right? This is how they get seen and understood, because it's back to that idea of like really seeing who they are through their intentions, really understanding who they are. And their intentions, again, they're always good. And so if you can just start naming strengths in your child, in your teenager, this is the way back. Even before you necessarily start holding a lot of boundaries or being concerned that they only give you a one-word answer, it's like just start noticing everything that they're doing right and show them that you believe in them, because our children, they need us to see their strengths first. They really need us to see their strengths before they can fully believe in themselves. And it's huge. And the way I explain this is that, I believe that we all need to have this pump of this fountain that kind of exists inside of us that's going to quench the thirst when we ever have that question, am I good enough, or do I have value, do I have worth? When our cup is feeling empty of self-belief, we should be able to go inside and fill up that cup and drink from that fountain. And it's parents' job to prime that pump so that it's working well, right? We have to pour a little bit of water into a pump to prime it, to get it to actually be able to pull the water up out of the ground. Sure. And so it's really parents' job to pour that water in. And that's what we're doing when we're naming the strengths, pointing out the strengths to our children and giving them self-belief. And that strengths tool, it does something in the connection between parents and children. Like I have a course, it's called True Confidence. And time again, I hear from moms, I'm getting hugs. My child is hugging me, and I've experienced that too. One day I was chatting with my daughter and I did say what you see. I don't really remember what it was, but I just remember the strength was like, that shows that you have really creative ideas. And she just ran up to me and gave me a hug. Like, it's like, she just can't stop herself, and she said, and that shows that you're really good at parenting, which is great, because then she's using the tools back on me. But there's just something inside kids that when their parents are reflecting back to them that they can believe in themselves, not only does it really build the child up on the inside, but it does something for the connection between the parent and child, because nobody can point out the strengths and affirm the strengths in a child like the parent can. Nobody has that big of an effect on the child as the parent does. And so it gets so deep in them, and it creates such a deep connection that you see them and that you believe in them, that they just can't help but express it, with their human body, they express it in that way. And it's so beautiful.
Really cool. Really cool. So you've got some courses, you do coaching, you teach people the system and the tools. What is happening for you over the next 6 months of this year, or wait, it's not even 6 months, 4 months of this year?
4 months left. Hey, oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Have you got anything coming up on your calendar?
Yeah, absolutely. So this fall, I'll be running my 12-week group program for moms, starting mid-September. And I also have that ongoing running. If anybody wants to work on me on a private one-to-one basis, you can always sign up for that. I mean, as long as I have spaces available, but that one runs constantly, whenever somebody's ready to kind of hop in. And so I do have this 12-week program. It's called Love the Way You Parent. And we really do dive into, allowing parents to be connected with themselves so that they can connect with their children and then build up the child's self-belief and to be able to hold those boundaries, right? Be the one in charge. Because again, that really, boundaries, a lack of boundaries is neglect. We talked about neglect a little bit, and it's very important to children to have parents that are active and holding boundaries. And so being able to do that in a way that allows you to connect with your child is huge. And then my True Confidence course, which is where we really dive into the strengths tool, and especially the hidden strengths. I teach stuff in this course that I don't teach in my 12-week program. And this is the one where, the parents are coming back saying, like, I'm getting all these hugs and my child's self-talk is changing, and all those really, really beautiful things. So that one, I don't have a date for when it's going to start in the fall yet, but it will be starting up in the fall, likely October, I think. But it's not determined yet. Yeah.
And is it good that you do one before the other, or are they both courses in themselves that you could do?
They're totally courses in themselves. So you can start wherever you're, you kind of feel called, whatever you like best, whichever one sounds the most interesting.
Awesome. And they're for parents who have children of all ages, would you say? Yes,
absolutely. Yes. So I have, people that I work with that have adult children, and I have people that have babies, so everybody and everything in between, it really, really works for. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, I'm stoked that we've had this conversation, and it's definitely turned a few gears in my mind about how we talk to each other and how we listen to each other and what that all means and where that all ends up over a lifetime. It's pretty significant. It's pretty damn significant.
It really is. Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Oh, gosh. Sure. I didn't mention the first premise of language of listening, and I think it's quite beautiful, and it applies, really to everyone. So the premise as it stands is that everything children do and say is communication, and they must continue to communicate until they are heard. And this is true. This is true for us as well. That we can say to ourselves that, everything that you do and say is communication, and your heart must continue to communicate until it's heard. So that takes us right back to, there's this communication going on all the time, and that we really can trust, what's going on inside. It just needs to get listened to, because it has really important messages about who we are, and who we are as, who we are as human beings is pretty darn amazing. And if we can all start to just appreciate that a little bit more, I think we can find a lot more joy in life and joy in our relationships as well.
100%. Yeah, I think it's about time that we start to glue all of this stuff together and come to terms with that amazingness that humans really are. So
pretty
thank
incredible.
you for your contribution to that culture and stepping towards the right place, Rosemary.
Oh, thank you, Asher. Thank you for that. The kind words and letting me spread my message.
Well, good. Yeah, well, I hope we can do this again in the future. And until next time, thanks for listening, Life Rocks audience. I hope you've gained some great insights and start to think about the ways that we talk to each other and our children as teachers, mentors, and parents, and as friends and lovers and all of the rest of it between human communication. It's a big, wide world, and we need to keep on thinking about it, just like Rosemary is. So thanks very much. And until next time, everybody, Life Rocks.
Thank you so much for listening to the Life Rocks podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then leave us a review. We'll be back soon with more inspiring content, and in the meantime, remember, life rocks.